Do you struggle with sales, or do you worry about being able to sell clients at a higher ticket price point and therefore you haven't raised your prices because you're struggling with sales? We all know though that making sales is really important and you don't have a business if you're not able to make sales. So my goal is to help you feel more confident about making sales, especially with addressing client objections that come up on sales calls as you work to implement a high ticket offer or just raise your prices in your business. So I didn't look back at my scorecards or calendar, but in 6 years of running a business, I've easily hosted 300 sales calls or more at this point. And for our high ticket offers specifically, we have maintained a 60 to 70% close rate on those sales calls, which I'm really proud of. So I'm gonna walk you through the 3 most common objections that come up with regular buyers and high ticket buyers that I have personally faced on my sales calls, and talk you through some ideas for how you can address them to make sure that you're not leaving your sales call just open-ended, dangling, saying with the potential client saying, I'll get back to you when I'm ready, with instead you walking away from your 20 to 30 minute sales call with an absolute yes or no answer from your client so that you know whether you close a client or not. This is the Profit and Prosper podcast, the podcast where I will teach you how to pay yourself a 6-figure salary and become a wealthy CEO from your business without having to sacrifice your life today. Before we talk about the objections though, I want to take a second and talk about the ethical piece of overcoming objections, because I know that a lot of the hesitation that we have, especially women have, around sales calls and about overcoming objections is that you think you're going to be perceived as being too pushy or too salesy, and that feels icky to you, right? And so we really want to address objections with our clients, not in a way that is forcing them or trying to trick them into buying something that they don't actually need, but approaching it from a perspective of saying, you know what, I'm here to help you make the best decision for you. And the only way I can help you make the best decision for you is if you are completely honest about what you're thinking and what you need. So I will say that if you haven't listened to last week's episode on the high ticket sales funnel, you definitely should, because I think that the microservice will do a ton of heavy lifting for you, and it will overcome a lot of objections if you implement the microservice instead of just a regular old discovery call. But either way, you might still have objections even after delivering the microservice. So we're going to talk through how to address those. So the microservice will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, but obviously we still want to have a lot of respect for the client and integrity. And so remembering that handling objections isn't about manipulating the client. It's just about helping them move past the fear or move past the doubt that they might have. They might have their own mindset issue coming up so that they can actually get the results you want. And honestly, y'all, if you design an offer that truly, truly impacts somebody, that if you're leading with service, right? If you're leading from a place of genuinely just wanting to have conversations with people and being of service and saying, you know what I'm selling actually does have value, then to me, that is not being too salesy or too pushy. You're coming from a place of wanting to deliver value. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're on a sales call with your prospective lead, and at the end of the call, you give your spiel about your offer. Hopefully, you have discussed potential price points, if not the price for this particular lead. And you say, okay, how does that sound? And they say, oh, that sounds good. I'll have to think about it. And then you say, okay, cool. It was great talking to you. Let me know when you've decided if you want to move forward or not. And then you get off the call. And then what happens is a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks goes by. You might try to follow up with the person. They ghost you, or they say, no, we just decided to move in a different direction. And you're like, okay, great. There's another 20, 30 minutes or even longer. Sometimes I know people do an hour-long sales calls. There goes an hour of my life that was just flushed down the toilet. So here's my best advice for hosting that sales call. Before the end, instead of letting them go off into wherever they go, get a verbal commitment. So you can literally ask the question, what are you thinking? Are you a yes? Are you ready to move forward? Are you ready to get started? Like, ask them a yes or no question that basically is going to force them into saying, yes, I want this, or no, I don't. And if they say anything but yes as an answer to that question, whether it's a no or I don't know, I have to think about it, I need to talk to my husband, whatever it is. If it's anything but a yes, it is your responsibility before you get off the call to figure out why. So I like to say something along the lines of, I totally understand. I know it's a big decision or it's a big investment, or it could be, a big change for you, just sort of empathizing with them. But I also like to ask, is there anything specific that you need to think about? Or is there anything specific that you have questions about? Because I would love to be able to clear up any confusion for you. And the reason that I like to ask this is just because I want to get a firm feeling for if they're not a hell yes right now, what is the actual thing holding them back? And I find that most of the objections, whatever they say, really comes down into 3 primary categories. They have an objection about price, which honestly, in most cases, it's actually a time objection or an effort or like a believability objection. So I'll talk about what I mean by each of those 3 things. So objective number 1, I would say when you're selling a high ticket offer, a lot of people will push back and say, it's too expensive. Can you do this for less? This isn't in my budget. I think a good intake form and a good sales page for your offer, again, will do a lot of that heavy lifting for you to weed out people who aren't even going to be, in the realm of being able to afford the price point that you're charging. So when they have that objection, it can mean that they either don't see the value or they don't believe the value of the offer of what you're saying that you provide, or there's actually, in a lot of cases, another underlying issue that is making them hesitant to spend the money on your offer. So one of my favorite questions to ask is, okay, if price was not a problem for you, would you be a yes? And this is always really interesting because they'll either say, yes, I would be a yes. And literally it's just the price. I don't have the money in my bank account, right? I don't have the limit on my credit card to pay for this or whatever it is, in which case you can make the decision of whether you work with them on it or not. You offer them a smaller offer, a lower investment, something to get them started. You don't have to do that, obviously, but you have the discretion to do that if this is something that you could see working out in the long term. But if they say no, like if price wasn't an issue, would you be in? And they say no, then that is where we know they actually have another objection. And this is why we have to ask the question before we get off the call. All right, so let's pretend that they said no. I'm not in. Even if price wasn't an issue, I still have questions. I still have hesitations. This is when you ask again, okay, tell me why. Like, what do you see not working? Or you kind of have to feel the situation, right? But again, always being empathetic, always being understanding, not trying to be pushy, but honestly, the best person for them to process their questions and thoughts about working with you is going to be with you when you can actually address and answer their questions live. So a lot of times if there's still an objection beyond the price, then it's going to come down to the time or their belief in actually getting the results that you say that you are going to get them. And honestly, even objection number 2, time, I really truly think that a lot of that also comes down to their mindset around actually being able to believe that they're going to get the results that you say you're going to get. So maybe the real sales objection is number 3, and it's just how it manifests in all these other things that people say. So objection number 2 is, I don't have time right now. So a lot of times when people say, I don't have time right now, it means that they're overwhelmed. They have a lot going on. They don't really feel like they can commit. They don't feel like they have the capacity to add anything else to their plate right now. I know that we have all felt that way before. To me, I think that when someone has a time objection, I think you need to get an understanding of what their top priorities are. I think this is one of the things that kind of grinds my gears a lot. So I'm going to try not to go into Sarah ranty mode. Okay. As an example, for my coaching offers or CFO services, right? If somebody tells me that increasing their business's profitability is their number 1 priority because it's a huge pain point, and at the same time, they turn around and tell me they don't have time to implement whatever they need to implement, there's a mismatch there, right? And that's what I mean when I say a lot of times the time objection is about them not having their priorities straight, I guess you could say, right? They think that they need this thing or they feel like they should want this thing, but they have to shift something else within their calendar or whatever it is in order to free up space to do this thing. I'd say this is really applicable in the coaching or done with you type of space. This may not come up as often if you have a done for you service business, because honestly, if it's done for you, you're hopefully doing the work for them and taking the load off their plate. So this is a much easier objection to handle, I think, if you're done with you service provider, because you can say, hey, look, here's what our onboarding process looks like. We will have some meetings, it will be a little bit of a heavier lift just because we need to get all this stuff from you, all this information from you. But once you get it over, your life is going to be so much better. We're going to save you this amount of time in this way. Here's how we're going to make your life easier. So I think if you can frame things that way and just make sure that they walk away with an understanding of your process, that's probably the best thing that you can do to help overcome the time objection. But if it's a time objection that's and you're not a done with you service provider, and it will take an investment of time on the client's part, and they're not sure that they're going to have the time, this is where you can say, hey, look, here's how I can help you restructure your time. You're telling me that this is a priority for you. And so here's how we're going to make sure that you prioritize it in your calendar. Here's some things that I think you need to let go of in order to be able to prioritize this, just helping them to actually align their actions with what they're saying is a priority. Objection number 3, which, like I said, I really think that this belief of whether or not your offer is going to work for the client is probably the real true underlying objection. Because if your offer is promising an ROI, for example, if they believe that they're going to get an ROI from the offer, they're not going to have a price objection. They're not going to have a time objection. And so I really think it comes down to the believability piece, which is another reason why I think that microservice funnel really is genius. And I'm not saying I came up with it, but it really is amazing in terms of a sales funnel, because you can help overcome that believability with the way that you structure your microservice. So when they tell you, I've tried something like this before, I've hired somebody like you before, it didn't work, I don't believe I'm going to get the results that I'm going to get, then obviously that's something you want to talk them through. One of the questions I like to include in my intake form in both coaching and CFO and tax services for all businesses: what have you tried before? What professionals have you worked with in this space before? And what has worked well and what has not worked well? I almost never get an answer of what worked well. They almost always tell me what didn't work well, but this is a really great space to get that information ahead of time before you get on the sales call, because you can address it up front. It's honestly usually one of the first things that I lead with in the actual sales call with them, is digging more into what didn't work with them before and how we're different, how we structure the offer to overcome whatever their issue was. But if they say something along the lines of, I'm not sure that this will work for me, then that again comes back to some of those internal beliefs and mindsets that they might have around their business goals or around their ability to prioritize their time or whatever it is that honestly can take a while to overcome. And so I'm not saying that on a sales call you want to be trying to push them to get past something that they're really uncomfortable with, but I really think it's worthwhile to take the time to understand, why don't you believe this will work? What are the potential downsides? What are the things that would help make this fail? Again, not to harp on the microservice funnel any more than I already have, but again, go listen to that episode if you haven't already. But I think that having that framework and the process laid out for them in that way to show them their exact next steps and making sure they understand that those are the things that are going to lead to them getting the results that they want. And I don't mean, again, in a salesy or sketchy way. I'm not trying to say that you should guarantee some sort of results, especially if it's a really monetary way, right? If you're a marketing agency, maybe you feel a little bit weird about guaranteeing a certain number of leads coming in or sales being made. Obviously, you can't predict the future, but you can say, hey, look, based on our experience working with these clients, we see that this is what works to get the results that you want. And look, we're here for you. If this isn't working, we will tweak, we will assess, we will try new things. That's why you're going to hire us, because we have the expertise in this space. We are always researching, we're always learning new things, and we will be implementing that to help you to make sure that you get the results that you want. If you want to dive deeper into selling high ticket offers in order to scale your business, then I have a couple of resources that might be helpful. Obviously, the CEO Shift mini course dives into the overall framework of scaling your business with a high ticket offer. I also have a digital course, Offers at Scale, that comes if you add on. There's a little bundle that has a high ticket offer objection handling guide and sales scripts. It's a really great PDF, if I do say so myself, that you can get. We'll put the link to that in the description. And bonus, it's also included completely for free inside the High Profit Society. So you can also join the High Profit Society, get all that for free on top of all the other frameworks we have, plus getting support in creating your offer, implementing your microservice, selling your offer, and scaling your business on top of all the money work we do. There's so many amazing things in there. So you can go check that out at sarahhyoung.com/society. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this little chat about sales, overcoming sales objections. If I had one overarching final piece of advice, it's going to be End your sales calls with a yes or no. Don't let people walk away. Don't let them float off into the ether. Try to get an answer for them before you get off the call and have a tangible next step for them to take or for you to take so that you don't leave it open-ended, because I find when you leave things open-ended, you close a lot less sales. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you back next time.